Just like most African countries, Liberia had its own tragic history of bloody coups, devastating wars, and wanton destructions. During the Liberian Civil Wars, there was widespread use of child abuse, rape, and violence against women. This is the story of how Leymah Gbowee, a young single mother of four, courageously led the largest women's non-violent movement in Liberia to change the sides of the war in Liberia in 2003 and started the peace process that ultimately brought peace to Liberia. And how did they do it? Well, prayer, fasting, sex strikes, and non-violent occupation. You begin to understand the scope of that accomplishment when you bring into focus the gender-based violence and systemic abuse that the women of Liberia suffered in the 14 years of the First and the Second Civil War in Liberia, and the state of their vulnerability during this period that the war lasted. Sit tight. This is an inspirational story of Africa's Martin Luther King Jr. and India's Mahatma Gandhi. Just that this time, she is a woman. Leymah Gbowee was born in central Liberia on February 1st, 1972, the fourth of five girls. Leymah spent her early years in the kind of typical close-knit rural African community where everybody, especially the extended family, had a stake in the upbringing of a child. You know, it is said around here that it takes a community to raise a child. A dedicated student, Leymah had just graduated from high school at the age of 17 and was preparing to go to university to fulfill her dream of becoming a medical doctor when fighting erupted. It changed her life forever. Of course, her world turned upside down. Liberia was plunged into its first civil war in 1989, and it turned her from a child into an adult in a matter of just hours. She fled from her home in Monrovia together with her parents and sisters, seeking safety and shelter where they could find one. However, after they settled down, Leymah's mother became traumatized by the war. It was at this point that at the age of 17, Leymah became the primary caregiver for her mother and a couple of their extended family and friends. Liberia will witness 14 years of two civil wars, punctured in between by a brief period of ceasefires. The wars were terribly destructive, with sudden deaths and gruesome atrocities becoming everyday occurrences. About 250,000 people died. Over half of the country's population was displaced. And at the end of the war, over 70% of the country's public infrastructure was completely destroyed. It was amidst the turmoil of the First War that Leymah became a young mother, having her first two children with her high school boyfriend, a son named Joshua, Nuku, and a daughter, Anba. Searching for a better life, they moved to Ghana where the father of her children became distant. At the time, she was expecting another child. She gave birth to her third child, Otto, prematurely and was forced to sleep on the floor of a hospital corridor for a week because she couldn't afford the bill. During that week, as she slept on the floor, she held her infant tightly to keep him warm enough to preserve his life and to ensure he didn't die. In Ghana, she braided her neighbor's hairs to support her growing family. She fled with her children back to the chaos of Liberia, where her parents and other relatives still lived, when her boyfriend grew violent. She had to hitchhike and ride buses on credit over a week because, in her own words, I didn't have a cent. Back in Liberia, she gave birth to her fourth child, Nicole Pudu, who was conceived in the final weeks of her prior relationship. A single mother at 25 with four children, Gbowee had no job and no prospect. She was, by her own account, angry, broke, and virtually homeless. But the words of her 5-year-old Nuku, which she came to regard as the voice of God, jolted her from her despair. It made her realize that the years of abuse and deprivation had made her succumb to the feeling of hopelessness, and that it was destroying her family, which was already beset by the brutal conflict in Liberia. But she believed she could recover a sense of control, of direction, and create a better life for her and her family with the help of God. She began taking little actions and asking God for guidance. and he did answer her with the people he sent into her life at crucial moments. As the war raged, she became convinced that the citizens of Liberia, especially its women, had to become more vocal advocates of the restoration of peace. After a ceasefire was brokered in 1997 and this first civil war subsided, she learned of a program run by the United Nations Children Emergency Fund, UNICEF, for training social workers who will counsel others traumatized by the war. Witnessing the effect of the war on Liberians, she enrolled in the program, trained for 3 months as a trauma counselor. It was here that Leymah became aware of her own abuse at the hands of the father of her 4 children, and much more. She also realized that for her to be a change agent in the world, she must first of all heal before she can heal others. Transformation begins only from within. Whatever you see outside is a product of change that has happened on the inside. With encouragement from her Liberian reverend, whom she calls Bibi, she began reading widely in the field of peace building, notably the works by Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and the Kenyan author and conflict resolution expert Hizkias Asef. Leymah graduated in 2001. If Leymah was like the rest of us, she would have tucked her degree in a box and wait around for a job. But that was not Leymah Gbowee. Leymah Gbowee knew that it was time for action. It was time to put the theories of all she had learned into action. How can she rest or be indifferent when her country was in the war? How can she rest and be indifferent when her country was still facing a situation that required her expertise? How can she ignore the sufferings of those around her? She had to do something. But first, she needed a platform. She found one in WANEP, West African Network for Peace Building. By 2002, she was spending her days as a trauma counselor and evenings as an unpaid coordinator at WAPNet. One night, she fell asleep in her office and had a dream that changed her life forever. She said God spoke to her saying, "Gather the women and pray for peace." Inspired by the dream and with the help of her allies, including a woman partner, she organized massive demonstrations, defying sitting orders of President Charles Taylor, who had plunged Liberia into its second civil war at this point. The most revolutionary thing that this woman did was a sex strike. Yes, sex strikes. They vowed to never allow their husband to sleep with them until the men had signed for peace. This was something uncommon in Liberia's history. This move drew attention from the international community, bringing sharp focus on Liberia, thereby pressuring the government to work towards peace. If the government could ignore all their pressure, it could no longer ignore anymore, because the whole world was paying attention, and the whole world was paying attention because the women were using the sex strike. Dressed in matching white t-shirts with WAPNet logos, white hair ties, present in great numbers as their number grew steadily, and relentlessly present every day, the women in white were difficult to ignore. In a highly risky move, the women defied the police and occupied the football field beside Tubman Boulevard, the route Chancellor passed to and from the Capitol Hill daily. With over 2,000 of them camped there for days, singing traditional and religious songs, Taylor could no longer ignore them. And finally, he granted them an audience in 2003.
We are tired of war. We are tired running. We are tired begging for burger wheat. We are tired of our children being raped. Kindly convey this to the President of Liberia. Thank you.
As the recognized leader of the women's movement, Leymah Gbowee was appointed its spokesperson. To make their case, she made a passionate plea for peace, and Taylor finally agreed to take part in the formal peace talks with rebels faction in Accra, Ghana, which he had refused to do previously. Taylor and Liberia's warring factions attended the regional peace talks in Ghana, which were organized by the West African region in an attempt to bring an end to the Liberian conflict. Leymah led a delegation of women to Accra, where they applied pressure on the warring factions during the peace talks to ensure progress was made. Initially, they sat outside the hotel where the negotiators met in daily demonstrations. But when talks dragged on for over a month with no progress made and the war back home continued, Leymah led the women into the hotel and formed a women barricade at the main entrance to the meeting hall, barring Taylor and the representatives from leaving for food or any other reason. The drama was just getting started. She sent a message to the lead mediator, Abdulsalami Abubakar, a former military head of state of Nigeria, that the women would remain seated in the hallway, holding the delegate hostage until a peace agreement was reached. Abubakar, who was sympathetic to the women's cause, announced with some amusement, "The peace hall has been seized by General Leymah and her troops." Can you imagine how funny that was? Abdul Salami was a general himself. When security forces tried to arrest them, Leymah Gbowee, in a smart move, together with the other women, threatened to rip their clothes off. You see, in Africa, it is believed that when a woman goes naked, she brings curses with anyone who sees her nakedness. All the delegates will have been cursed, and terrible misfortunes will have befallen them. This drama proved effective and a turning point for the peace talks, as the mood in the meeting hall turned to somber in the following days, and Gbowee and her allies were allowed to continue occupying the hallways of the meeting venue. Within weeks, almost 14 years of fighting came to an end, with the signing of the Accra Comprehensive Peace Agreement and President Taylor being forced to resign and exiled to Nigeria. The war officially ended in 2003. Leymah described what the women did as the beginning of the end. The transitional government of Liberia was formed later that year. General elections were held in 2005. It was the freest election Liberia ever had up until that time. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won the election, becoming the first woman to become elected president, not just for Liberia, but for the whole of Africa. The Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace was instrumental both for the successful conduct of the election and the emergence of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. In a 2014 interview for the International Women's Day, Leymah Gbowee said, "The Liberian Women Peace Movement demonstrated to the world that grassroots movements are essential to sustaining peace, that women in leadership positions are effective brokers for peace, and the importance of culturally relevant social justice movement. Liberia is a good example to the world that women, especially African women, can be drivers of peace." Charles Taylor was later arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to virtual life imprisonment for crimes against humanity. Back home, easily recognizable in the iconic white witness shirt, Leymah Gbowee and other Liberian women activists were revered as national heroines in the street by Liberians for weeks following the signing of the Accra Peace Agreement. In 2011, Leymah Gbowee was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace alongside President of Liberia Ellen Johnson Sirleaf and Yemeni journalist Tawakkul Karman. They were recognized for their non-violent struggle for the safety of women and for women's rights to full participation in peace-building work. She was honored as a flag bearer for the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympics Games that happened in the UK, and the opening ceremony happened in London. In 2017, she was selected by the UN Secretary General to serve as a member of his high-level advisory board on mediation, and she's a former SDGs advocate for the United Nations. She has been named as one of the top 100 most influential people in the gender policy by a political and one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine. Overcoming despair, heartbreak, and doubting personal challenges, she has become international spokeswoman and advocate for women and victims of war and violence. In an exclusive interview with Odyssey Networks in 2011, shortly after becoming the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Leymah Gbowee gave simple yet powerful advice.
Don't wait for a Gandhi. Don't wait for a king. Don't wait for a Mandela. You are your own Mandela. You are your own Gandhi. You are your own king. You know your issues. You know your concerns. And you know the solution.
Nelson Mandela is not coming to save us. Mahatma Gandhi is not coming to save us. Martin Luther King is not coming to save us. All we have is ourselves. All we have is us who are around right now. We have to save ourselves. Whether it is fighting against injustice, whether it is fighting against women oppression, whether it is fighting against corruption, fighting for educational rights, fighting for climate change, fighting for environmental rights, fighting for personal development, whatever it is, we are our own saviors. The world is waiting for us. The world is waiting for you. You can be the change that you seek. I hope to see you at the top. Thank you for watching this episode. Kindly subscribe, share with others. Thank you.